Hi, everyone, and welcome again to the TROPT Webcast. I am Lourdes Terecha, founder of the Rise of Privacy Tech, or TROPT as we like to abbreviate here. And this month at TROPT, we're talking and exploring data governance, particularly as it relates to privacy and privacy tech. And I'm really excited about today's guest. Today, we have Catch CIO Yakov Salomon talking to us and talking to us about his experience in the data governance and privacy space and the products that Catch is building in that space, the use cases that he will be sharing from their market research and all of that, the privacy problems that are being solved with data governance solutions. So welcome to the Webcast, Yakov, and thank you for making time to join us this morning.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine, Lourdes. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, I have, because I did my research, I know quite a bit about your background, your work at Salesforce and whatnot. I'd love for you to talk a little about your origin story, if I may, and what led you to Catch and building in this data governance for privacy space.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think there's two aspects to the story, I guess. One is circumstances, like where we end up and how life leads us. So you're correct, and you had previously guest on the show, Vivek Vaidya. We've worked together for a while now. He was the CTO founder at a company called Crux. That was all in the data space. I was heading up the machine learning and AI and analytics function there. And we got acquired by Salesforce in November 2016. And as part of being, grouped into Salesforce and working through there, I ended up helping a lot on the machine learning and AI and what Salesforce calls Einstein over there. And it was very fortuitous, but we just got inside the 2017-2018 mark where GDPR became a big issue. And we because of our background and because of what we've built already, we were assigned the job of making Salesforce GDPR compliant. So we really experienced firsthand a lot of the pain for a large organization to deal with this very disruptive set of regulations, disruptive to the way we used to do big data and machine learning and everything to do with data, really. And out of that came the understanding that there's got to be a better way to do it. And hence we found Catch and went from there. I think on a personal level, I would say that the itch that I want to scratch, so to speak, as when founding Catch, was very much to do with my machine learning and AI background. I often say I'm an accidental data scientist. I didn't, I've done mathematics in my background and played with technology all my life, and I happened to be in the right place in the right time to ride this machine learning and AI revolution. I teach at Berkeley machine learning. And I've been in many companies now building technologies and teams and companies around machine learning. And the frustration I think I have after many years is that on one hand, we have cutting edge technology and cutting edge algorithms, but we are not still solving the real hard problems. We're delegated most of the time to solve, the like buttons and the ad optimization and personalizing maybe shopping carts. But the real problems around health and finance and so on are kind of evading us. I have many friends, CTO co-founders in health, for example, companies that have technology that is proven to save lives, they cannot deploy. And when I look deeply into it, it's all to do with this notion of trust. It's all to do with the notion of privacy, right? We have to fix the way we treat data and we collect, store, process, and share data in a trusted way so that we can unleash really the power of machine learning, data intelligence systems to do good in the world. And so I really was hoping that when all is done and dusted beyond the regulations, the world that will emerge from all of this work is a world that does have data do more of its day job properly with intelligent systems and helping the world, and less of all the negative externalities that we know about data usage these days. So that's my personal interest in this kind of field.
Oh, I love it. And I'm sure that just knowing our audience, there are a few things there that would just resonate with them, right? The early days leading up to GDPR, those were quite traumatic days for many of us. We do remember all the work, not just from the check box compliance work, but also the underlying work that had to be done by tech teams, by engineering and product teams and data governance teams to do the underlying, to really implement those rules and not just beyond paperwork and processes. And so the other thing that I'd love to unpack is your work and expertise in machine learning and AI, because you touched upon several things that resonates with many forward-thinking chief privacy officers and just data folks, professionals in general. And that's, trust, like you were saying, the value of data and untapping that beyond the negative externalities, as you were saying.
Yep.
And so, let me, I guess before we do that, let me ask you, what is your vision of the role of data governance when it comes to privacy, and how can privacy tech solutions like Catch help in solving some of those problems that you guys are seeing in the market in that space? And then we'll jump to machine learning and AI after that.
No, of course. And I think I respect that. And machine learning, I've seen the field grow, and I understand that traditionally it was the small part, the small wheel, cogwheel, right, of what we do, and everything else was a whole lot of other stuff. But I think increasingly we know that where the world is heading. So it's going to be increasingly the dominant thing that data does is provide intelligence inside the data intelligence system. But to your questions on governance and privacy specifically, so governance is a very, very broad umbrella, right? I looked up a little bit how the industry defines data governance, and of course there isn't one definition of what data governance is, but it's something to do with ensuring that the data is secure, ensuring the data is private, ensuring the data is accurate, ensuring the data is available, ensuring the data is usable. So there's a lot of things that come under it, and of course Catch, as any tool, can't solve all of them. So there is many other players in this world, and I think CIOs and chief data officers, etc., have a hard task ahead of them of figuring out how to really build a best-in-breed set of tools that help them cover all the aspects of what data governance is. But I think when it comes to privacy specifically, I think there are, let's say, three things that are really important as far as data governance is concerned. The first one is that an organization has to understand the implications of regulations and how it apply to their business and what they do with data. And then they need to translate that into policies internally, right, that govern how data is being used and acted upon. And the third thing is they need to action on it. They need to make the actual systems that collect, store, analyze, share data, whether it's owned and operated, so your databases in Snowflakes and your Spark machine learning workloads, etc., and also your third-party services like Salesforce and LinkedIn and anywhere else you store data, respect those policies in some way. And Catch really helps.
Yep.
Yeah. And Catch helps with all three of those when it comes to privacy, and it also helps the risk assessments, if you'd like, around data. Some of the risk assessment aspect that exists around data, of how you should think about, from a privacy perspective, where are you vulnerable, where do you have sensitive data, where do you have access that might be not according to your policies and your regulations and everything as far as mandated, and how you might want to act in those situations. So that's at a high level where we see ourselves really within the big governance conversation, kind of really focusing on programmatically helping you with regulations, and then helping you understand risk through data stewardship.
I'd love to ask a little bit about passing it on to third parties like LinkedIn and Salesforce, because that's one of the pain points I keep hearing from my fellow privacy practitioners. And as a former buyer, that's one of the things that we had to build internally for, because 5 years ago there wasn't anything in the market. And so I'm curious, what are the set of tools that you guys have built in that space to flow down to processors, sub-processors, third parties, some of those data governance rules that you want to flow down to them to, as you're required under laws like GDPR.
Yep.
What are some of the modules that you guys created in that space?
Yeah, so I'll take a step back first and just describe a little bit I think some of the epiphanies we had when we've built the system first at Salesforce. The first one is that, as engineers, we have the data stack we know and love that includes, the various APIs to various other systems. And I've spoken to a lot of other teams and companies out there, so I know this is prevalent out there, that the first inclination when all these changes came around is to try and uh, take all of that and embed it within the existing data stack. So change your application code, change your data storage behavior, and so on and so on, to try and address those new requirements. The problem, of course, as you do that, if GDPR was the only privacy or regulation that ever came out, and the whole world would have, and that was, some people thought that would happen, then you might say,
to a certain extent, like 80% of it, but there is that 20% that's different, right?
right.
Right.
Right. So if that was the world, then maybe you could do the work once and done. But because we are in an ever-changing world, and it will take quite a few years before globally, in every single jurisdiction and every single regulations, people have come up with some pattern of how they want to really treat data and privacy in different locations. And I won't be surprised if there will be GDPR 2.0 and 3.0, and things will keep on flexing, right? Then once this is the reality, you cannot anymore absorb all of this work on your existing data stack. So the first thing I think that we've realized earlier on is that we need to build a separate kind of set of tools. And if the data stacks operate in the what we call the data plane, then we need a new set of tools that operate in the permission plane, right? Somewhere that, you can think about consent as permission, you can think about deletion and request, etc., as permissions and controls. So we need that control plane for the data. And so we've built those tools for the control plane such that we can float that information, whether it's a request to delete my data, whether it's a change in the consent, don't use my data, please, for analytics. You can use it for providing me services, maybe personalization, but I don't want you to use it for marketing. And taking those signals and shipping them through the entire data supply chain, as we call it, right? And the three ingredients that are important when you do that is, first of all, you need to have a standard of what those permissions are and how you communicate them across places. The second thing you need to have is a good understanding of the underlying data of which you communicate, right? So I know Vivek spoke about it when he was here, about the data catalog and the importance of discovery to enable that. And the third thing, of course, is you need to have an understanding of how the identity is kind of manifested in this ecosystem world. Because what you are, when I show up on a website, what I am to that first-party website in terms of who I am and my identity is not the same as I am in LinkedIn and Salesforce and everywhere else. And so understanding of how to navigate the identity space, first-party, third-party, email, hash emails, etc., is a big part, what we sometimes call the device graph. It is a big part of how to send those signals around. But of course, we leave that world heavily when we were building Crux and then later on in Salesforce. So we understand that deeply.
Thank you for that. So now I have a better idea. I mean, we did touch upon some of the tools that you guys are building with Vivek, especially with the data cataloging suite of tools. I do love the term you just uttered, which was the permission plane, because it really jives with the data lifecycle, right? From collection to processing, use, sharing, up until the end of it. And a lot of the tools, the early tools in the privacy tech space, has been very, just one part of the data lifecycle, not throughout. And so one part in particular that hasn't matured is in the use sharing space, right? We don't have a lot there. And that's really where a lot of the machine learning and analytics work is being done. And I'm curious what you guys have in store for us there, existing or in the roadmap, if you have, if you're able to share anything. What are some of the things that you're excited about that will help data science folks and data analytics folks, my old colleagues in marketing and R&D who want to tap into the value of data in a privacy protective way? I'm curious what you guys are building in that space.
Oh, Fantastic question. And if I go too long, you have to stop me because I
No
love.
worries.
So first of all, I think, um, like I said again, we really believe in this notion of compliant and controlled and secure. Like that there is an evolution, that an organization can't jump straight away to the end goal necessarily, and there is steps that needs to happen. So certainly, I think the first step, as we already said, is to form that understanding, right, of the regulatory space that you operate in. What are the requirements that your organization is responsible for, and then how you as an organization want to show up and form those policies. And we have tools, we call them responsive compliance and risk intelligence tools that help you form and consumer management platforms how to collect and build those ways in which you react to the regulatory landscape that you're in. The second thing is you want to be able to
That's the baseline layer. The compliance is the baseline. And then now we get to the exciting stuff, the hard
That's right.
work.
That's how you get the permissions in. The second thing is it's still pedestrian, right? But I think this is a lot of where organizations are today. Is once you understand, you have to respect that there is a way in which you can absorb that on your technology that is very costly through what we call programs. So you create the Excel spreadsheet and you figure out who's responsible and you form on the messages and you create the Zendesk tickets or the Jira tickets and that very accumulates very quickly and becomes others and takes away a lot of attention from the technology to build what you actually want, the feature.
But also inaccurate after a certain point. You're relying on spreadsheets.
Exactly. So the big step we're doing there is moving it from programs to programmatic, right? Like this ability of now having
by that. I know that's one of the things that you guys in Catch really champion is programmatic privacy. I'd love for you to unpack that for the audience.
Yes. So what we mean by programmatic is that instead of just the human involved touch points in every step of that workflow, we have a lot more of APIs and ways to integrate into your existing systems, like your Snowflake and your Redshift and your Oracle database and other mechanics that you use to control process data, to instruct them with the specific language that each one of them speaks. So we've built those what we call provide those integrations into those technologies to take a signal like do not use my data for marketing, or delete my data, or port my data, which you some of the things you've touched with Vivek as well, and action on them using technology, right? Sending APIs, sending messages, integrating into it, as opposed to a human having to integrate with that. So the human touch moves from now you have to go all the way to the last mile and create everything, to more being able to orchestrate that. Here's a workflow of the systems I want you to go through. Here are the policies that I want you to adhere with. And then an intelligent governing system can take those and action on them in the small inside the databases. So that's what we mean by programmatic. We also include in that sending the signals around. So you ask about how do we notify LinkedIn and how do we notify Salesforce? It's kind of maybe pedestrian, but APIs. Now, the interesting thing is that a lot of those companies, when we started off, we thought surely every one of those processes have already built dedicated APIs to understand deletion requests and consent changes and so on and so on. And we discovered that is not the case, actually. So we build layers of how to leverage existing low-level APIs in some of those systems to manifest some of the operations that are required. For example, for don't send me marketing emails anymore. How do we remove you from the appropriate segments inside LinkedIn, etc., so you don't get emails anymore? So programmatic covers all of that layer. And then the third one, and I'm sorry, I'm just getting down to the machine learning and AI, but really, when you think about it, some of the changes of trust that need to happen as far as machine learning and AI is kind of bookkeeping, right? Is to know that this model trained on that data now contains some private and sensitive information in the parameters of that trained model, which I'm going to ship to production now. If something changes in the world, Either a new regulation comes out, or I, as an organization, want to adopt a new policy, a new stand with respect to privacy, or one of the consumers of whom data I've used to build that model have dissented or asked to delete the data, or do not want me to use the data for personalization anymore. Which model of those are not valid anymore? Which ones I need to retrain? So there's a bit of really just the permissions flowing through the different life cycles, as you say, of data, and how do you manifest that in the different systems and gives that the control. So that is really bookkeeping of the permissions and the data sets and the individual data through the life cycle. Let me pause here for a moment. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So I have a couple of follow-up, actually a bunch. In the privacy tech space, there are different buyer user personas. So the first layer that we talked about, the compliance stuff, might go under the chief privacy officer's team or legal team or GRC team, the folks that are doing mostly compliance work. When it comes to the permission layer and the work that really the stack of tools that you need to govern data. I think you were talking about, during the sharing, during the use and sharing. For instance, when data science teams are about to do analytics, are the users the same, or do you shift to then having data scientists and those types of personas as the user buyer for that set of tools?
Yeah, I think the short answer is it depends,
On the
and we
org.
see and we see different patterns in different places. I think, my personal opinion, if we do everything right at the end of the day, then all the use cases for utilizing data, be it for analytics, data science, marketing, business intelligence, whatever that is, the consumers of data, to a large extent, need and can be decoupled from all of this making, right? So
Right.
I think there was a lot of power when SQL came around, and anybody could go to the data and say, select stuff from table and give me whatever I need. I think that's very powerful, right? We removed a lot of friction. And I'd love to see a world at the end where we end up back where, data scientists are busy about building models. They don't have to worry about regulations and policies and everything else, right? Like, we don't all have to become experts in this. And that there is there's a few stakeholders in an organization that each in their own swim lane. So a legal person in the GC can form the legal stance that a company wants with regard to regulations. They don't need to translate that or explain that necessarily to the security person who needs to set up standards about what encryption means and what anonymization means, etc. And it's separate again from the folks that actually build the technology that can take all of that information and integrate that without having to get in the weeds. I know myself, I've been in many board room meetings where legal folks are trying to explain to technologists how it works, and it's difficult, and there's no real guarantee that it works. So we definitely want to remove that. Today, however, absolutely, I think that a lot of the independent teams inside organizations do stand up and say, look, I want to be responsible. I know I'm accessing data for analytics. I know I'm accessing data for data science. I want to do the right things. What tools can you give me today, irrespective of what my entire organization is doing, to make sure that the data I use is private and secure? How do I do that? So we do examples like that. And the set of tools the set of tools that we offer over there are things like responsive compliance and risk intelligence. Like, how do you get an understanding of what your data is, where the risk lies, which access or not is kind of permitted, and how do you manage that?
So in a way, some of these tools that you guys are building help bridge the gap between the legal and engineering teams, right? Like, that's one of the debates that we've had for decades in the privacy space. Privacy is cross-functional, right? It's not just about engineering or compliance or legal. It's also about marketing sometimes. And wherever there's personal data, you have to think about privacy. But there is that language or different languages being spoken, and to a certain extent, the tech chips away at that gap that you have amongst different groups in this cross-functional area of privacy. That's one of the things that I'm hearing from you. But feel free.
No, and this is normal, right? Like, I can reflect on other areas, for example, data science, right? It's now prevalent everywhere. We know what it means, and the data science function and tools and engineering is kind of well understood, and there's good patterns. But not even 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. It was not really clear, where do data scientists live? Are they within engineering? Are they somewhere else? What are the tools they're using? How do they have access? How do they build? How do they ship to production? How do we generate code? And all of that got worked out over time, and increasingly became, technology, open source projects and tools and services that other third-party startups and companies offer to kind of bridge the gap and make it all integrated into one overall delivery of software and services to customers. I think the same will happen here. Another example is accessibility, right? Like, you go across the internet now, and it wasn't the case once that as front-end developers, we really cared about making every website accessible to all sorts of different conditions, right? And then, for a while we were working out on what does it mean, and we build the tools, and now we have the standards and the libraries and everything we need to implement that. And increasingly, every website now supports that. I think the same will happen here, right? Like, I think with time, as we build this privacy enhancing technology stack, and add more of the understanding, there'll be less and less requirement for everybody to think, reinvent the wheel, so to speak, in every organization of how to bridge those things. And there'll be more tools available on the shelf, like Catch, to kind of address some of those.
Thank you for that, Salman. I do have a few more questions, and I do want to take this time to invite the audience to ask any. We'll keep an eye out on the chat and comments if you guys have questions for Yakov today. And so this is more of a playful, less serious question. I'm curious, outside of what you guys are building at Catch, what are some privacy tech tools, may they be consumer or enterprise, that you wish existed? And you could be as serious or as playful as you want when it comes to this.
Yeah, it's as responsible some extent to the innovation here. I see the roadmap long ahead. So I do appreciate the question, and I think that there's still a few long arching kind of themes that I think will have to emerge over the next few years. As a practitioner, I would say, just to speak to the last question you had, I would love all of it to go away, right? For me to be back in days before that I could concentrate on building applications and algorithms that produce products and services that delight my customers, and less be incumbent by worrying about all these other aspects that I now need to onboard myself on. So any tools, any service that can help me get back to focusing, that's right, is in my service, and it could be something like something that is consciously aware, in the background of all the data I'm collecting, and what are the permissions that are attached to every piece of data for every user, for every use cases, that natively kind of only offers the data that I'm allowed to use when I need to run my machine learning training, or when I need to access the database for some analytics. That all of that happens, of course, in a performant way, and without a big ask for implementation. Now, these things are at odds today, and wanting all of it, of course, is unrealistic. Some things will have to give. But if I look at other industries and how we evolve, whether it's HTTPS moving from HTTP, or whether it's encryption by default on the hard drive we all have on the laptop, that is now accelerated to a point where it's the default operation rather than us concerning about the CPU and I/O. I think that's where the world is heading. So we're going to see a lot of improvement in those tools and mechanics to make it more and more transparent. In the small, I would say one area I'd love to see more work done is, it's partially me and partially what I see from our customers and from the prospects we speak to, is the early days of this statistical anonymization world. So techniques like homomorphic encryption and differential privacy and zero knowledge proof and multi-party computation and all of this great work that is coming out of academia, etc., being thrown out there today is a bit of a dark art, right? Like everybody hears those terms and they don't know what to do with it. And from a practical perspective, it's very hard for a practitioner to know which one to use where and how and when, and how do they all come together eventually to drive me getting more value out of the data so I can really build those services to delight the customer. So I'd like to see the industry come up with much simpler interfaces to all of those very elegant and complex techniques that abstract some of the gory details and just gives the utility out of it. And again, just drawing from fields like data science and machine learning, that's what we did. Initially we were down in the weeds of whether it's this technique or that technique or here or there. And now we understand that there is some interfaces we can deal with. And some people will understand the detail underneath, but everybody need to become an expert on. So I think that's my personal wish, is to see the world evolve to a point where these techniques are somehow abstracted behind a very elegant interface.
I have a couple of follow-up on that before I read one of the questions that we have from the audience. To what extent do you think, the whole functionality versus privacy, I mean, you talked about simplicity. To what extent do you think that is that a function of the very early or the nascency of the privacy tech space? Right, like it's really early, and so some of the tools are a little bit wonky still, and haven't yet matured compared to, let's say, the cybersecurity space, which is like 15 to 20 years ahead of us.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I think like being nascent, being new has, of course, the aspect of it looks like the variation is big, right? The standard deviation is large, and we're going in different directions. And there's a lot of That's right. There's a lot of busy work done, but in the same time, we also get to ask questions again from first principles. So I think cybersecurity is a great example, right? If I just take the topic of access control, access control is a classic, old school security IT kind of function. Role-based and attribute-based access control have been around for a long, long time. But in the same time, we all knew that somewhere they're ready to be rehauled, right? Because you ask anybody and they'll tell you every engineer has access to all data, even though they only use 2% of it. And they'll tell you that the explosion of roles that an IT personnel or an admin can manage in terms of access is exploding. And at the end of the day, they can't really address the fundamental need of this user for this purpose, for this particular part of the data is available or not. So I often say that access control was ready to do the same as relational database when we moved to big data, right? So we are ready for a new rehaul of access control, and that's what privacy kind of became the forcing function for. So I think, yes, we are early days. There's going to be many iterations still we need to do to land on the precise set of tools that are required to address all the different aspects. We also early days in terms of regulations. Like I said, again, GDPR 2.0, 3.0, 10.0. I don't know how much it's going to go. There's going to be revisions of these things. So we have to stay flexible enough from the technology side as well to be able to address all of those unforeseeable but kind of expected changes that are coming down the road. So we will build those. I have confidence on that. We are in the second or third generation of privacy enhancing tools. It certainly was the first generation after GDPR of great tools that came out, but didn't have the benefit of seeing CCPA and CPRA and all the other stuff that came around. So really built very specific for GDPR. We've rehauled them with a set of tools now that are a lot more built for any future regulations that are going to come down the track. So I think we're doing well there. Now it's the question of how do we, hone in on the last mile of taking legacy technology stacks and bringing them into this new world. I think for new companies starting today, there's a good set of tools. I think how to solve the legacy problem, which we spend a lot of time in Catch trying to address, is going to be the hard, hill we have to climb.
Speaking of regulation, I want to take the chance to post to you this question from one of our audience members, and then I'd love to chat more about the legacy problems. So speaking of GDPR and CCPA, are you guys tracking, the ADPPA? And do you see any problems with this proposal that's gaining traction in DC when it comes to cross-functional teams, legal, DevOps, marketing? How are you guys thinking at Catch about this potentially comprehensive federal privacy law? I mean, obviously, there's a debate as to whether that's ever going to materialize, but it does seem to be gaining traction. I'm actually headed to DC in a couple of weeks to speak at an event with regulators and policymakers about this. And so I'm curious what you guys are doing to prepare for this or in anticipation of this proposal.
Yeah, so I'll first put a disclaimer that I am not the expert on all things legal and regulations in
no worries. No one is.
we have very capable people on staff and partners that we continuously inform ourselves of everything coming down the pipe on a regulatory perspective, and our product team is always busy trying to find the right templates and figure out how our product can be used to leverage across all of those new regulations. I'm happy to address more broadly the notion of a federal and where we've published a paper about it, where I would like to see kind of that conversation progressing. So, I mean, first of all, just like tax and other things, yes, there are federal stuff, but there's always going to be local stuff. I think that's kind of expected. I don't think that it's going to be. I mean, even if it comes to be, and there is some standards which we have. I mean, like how the acts around minor data has been around for over 11 years, and it is federal and it is obligated everywhere. And so we do have federal, and we have to have some general standards, some baseline that we have to mandate across the industry. But I do think that, I mean, even if you look at HIPAA, right, it's been around for a long time. Still, some states like Colorado and others have gone above and beyond that and created additional requirements that are complementing and extending HIPAA into other stuff. So if we look around at other examples, I think the same will happen here. If it happens, or if it's not, there's still going to be variation. So I don't think it will solve there's not going to be one thing to rule them all as we would like. And of course, internationally, it's different.
Although some of the lobbyists may, on behalf of their clients, won't want preemption, but I'm probably with you. Even with preemption, I don't think it's going to do away with all, hundreds of privacy and security laws at the state level, especially when it comes to, health data and children's data and financial data.
And here, but here's maybe a new idea or a different idea that I'd like to propose out to your audiences is that, again, where would I like to see this go? We were very busy because it was the Wild West as far as data, and we needed to put in some really strong guardrails. We were very focusing on regulation as a humanity, as a civilization in the last 4 years, and putting the kind of boundaries of what you shouldn't do, right? And then going and finding the offenders. What I'd like the conversation to change over time is from regulatory kind of command and control to a lot more of incentive based, right? And to give you an example, I mean, we've done that with environmental, right? So we first had very strong regulations about pollution, etc. And then eventually we've turned that into how do we ignite the market, the innovation, the creations, the companies, the consumers to start be incentivized to make decisions in the right direction. And I'm very much more than seeing federal regulation. I'd love to see a lot more federal incentives. How do we, through tax or through other means, we have like I said, we published an article about that. How do we create incentives for privacy enhancing technology for companies that choose to use data ethically. How do we make that industry rise up and be incentivized in a way that really changes behavior? Because that's what we need next. We need consumers, we need companies, organizations, and innovation technology to start building the tools to make ethical data use the default. And that's what I'd like to see a lot more, to be honest with you.
That's music to my ears. I've written about how we need more carrots and not just sticks when it comes to privacy and data protection. And in our last, set of recommendations to the White House, one of our recommendations was we need more incentives. So you and I are on the same page on that one. When it comes to, I do want to jump back on legacy systems. That's one of the biggest pain points that we have, especially when it comes to non-tech companies. There are a lot of legacy systems that they may not have the engineering teams or bandwidth or resources to fix in-house. And so what are the conversations like? Are they similar to the digital transformation, the cloud adoption conversations that you've seen in the past decade? How are some of these big fortune companies thinking about retooling, or are they even thinking about retooling their data stack when it comes to privacy to account for privacy and data protection obligations? Or I suppose I'd love to hear what you're seeing.
No, and
market research.
It is very, yeah, this is a very, very important question that I think doesn't get addressed as much in reality, because we can talk about a world we want to be in, but then we have to come back to earth and realize the world we are living in. And
some of these companies have had these systems for 70 years. One of my past companies was, a giant, and they've had these systems and just couldn't rip them out. So I'm curious, like, how do you guys advise and talk to these clients when they're in that position?
Yeah, and we had the fortunate opportunity to talk to, and there's traditional industries like finance and health that have more of that because of regulatory compliance and other requirements over time, of how fast they can move and adopt new technologies. And certainly the way we've treated data up to this point is collect it first and think about it later, which is, created to some extent a lot of that legacy pain, because of course, if you drop a drop of ink in the ocean, trying to retrieve it is a very impossible kind of act. And sometimes, I take some personal data, I send it into the huge, humongous terabytes of data kind of world of unstructured data I have that I've accumulated. It's very, very difficult.
IT on top of that.
It's very, very difficult to go and retrieve it. So what we saw, things that help, okay, is let's talk first of all about organizations that already realized that this is the time and this is where it's heading, and we're going to have to make some calls. So for some of those, it coincides with other changes they have to make. So for example, the move to the cloud, right? A lot of those organizations have, some of those organizations held on, right, to on-prem, and
COVID happened.
Yeah, exactly. And they it becomes harder and harder to maintain on-prem for many different reasons, including hiring the right people, right? That it's a skill that is kind of disappearing. So I think when organizations get to that point now and they're going, okay, how do we combine it all? Let's migrate to the cloud and introduce in the same time privacy and trust. Then at least you're minimizing the number of times you have to go around, and you combine it all at once. And it doesn't have to be just to move from on-prem to the cloud. It could also move from a traditional or legacy kind of data management platforms to newer ones. So we definitely seen in a lot of organizations, big banks, etc., where not the entire organization, but parts of the organization say, hey, look, we want to do machine learning, we want to do data science, we want to do analytics. We can't do it on the technologies you already have. How about we adopt some of the new technologies, be it Snowflake, be it Spark, be it whatever it is, in the cloud. And as we're doing that, we're also going to incorporate, modern governance and privacy of data in the subject. So there will be the rogue component within those organizations that kind of lights the way. And slowly, as they build and establish, and the organization sees that this is trustworthy, more and more of the migration is going to happen. So I think that's the positive path that can happen. I think the more interesting and more painful is what do you do with the legacy data itself? Because you might have terabytes of data that you've collected, just
Illegally.
storage is cheap. Let's just collect now, think later. Um,
Right.
and for there, we have a set of tools that can help with that. We don't have time to go long, but I would say at a high level, the idea is to stratify the data. There's some data that is hardly ever used, then just put it on ice, basically. There's data that is very commonly used, so then you proactively discover, classify, build policies around that. And then there's a data that is sometimes used. And there you're going to pay, you're not going to do anything a priori, but maybe when you need to access next, you're going to do some work and then bring it into the new kind of protected, secure world by discovering and applying policies. So that at least you have some options there about how you can think about this big problem.
I'm really interested in, I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll start wrapping up after this, but we didn't even get through half of the questions, but I'm really interested in the set of tools where you said, the data that you don't need, then you put them on ice. So that in my head, that's the bucket of retention and deletion tools that I've heard a lot of buyers really ask for. And there might be one or two startups that say they have solutions in this space, but not really. We've taken a look and they weren't really there. So I'm curious, are you guys also building retention tools or data that let me just expand that automate retention policies and do a lot of the work when it comes to deletion?
Yes. So this is roadmap, I'll say right now. And it's mostly roadmap in terms of, like we have thought and we have patents out there for a lot of technology already 3 years ago. But we also, there's a certain level where you feel where the market is ready to address some of those, or whether, there's much more pressing issues like how do I become compliant tomorrow, or how do I let the regulators know? So it's just to say that I think the market is evolving into those, and we're ready for it, and not a lot of organizations are ready for that. But if I am to allude to some of this conversation you had with Vivek as well, is that when you think about it, once you have a permission, a governance, a privacy system that has an understanding of the policies that you want to apply to data, and an understanding through discovery and classification of the data assets themselves, and then has a set of tools that are able to go to every respective technology, be it Snowflake or S3 or Spark or what have you, and make the policies be applicable, then you kind of have all the ingredients you need to manage things like data subject request, deletion, and portability that we spoke about in the last podcast, as well as things like modifying the retention kind of policies of those technologies. And so, yes, at the end of the day, we have been, as technologists, we have been managing retention of data. We set up on our systems, on our databases, on our key value stores, TTLs, on how long any object can live for. And we've been doing it for a long time. We've done it for cost reasons alone, right? Like we don't want to store stuff wherever that we don't need. And we also, the industry has come up with ways of how to store things in a way that are cheaper to store perhaps, but harder to access, but are secure, right? And I'm talking about backups as well. I know that backups is kind of sometimes comes up in the context of privacy. Oh my God, I've been backing up my data forever. Somebody says delete my data. What do I do now? Do I rehydrate all my copies and I'll go and find? I mean, that's not realistic, right? So I think the regulations also are going to evolve around reality. And the truth is, if you have some backup there that is encrypted in some place, we're going to have to call it as good as gone. Now, if you want to rehydrate a copy from the past, at that point in time, you have to apply all the changes in regulations and all the changes in permissions you have seen since then. So you do need a system that can, bring that copy up to the current state. But as long as it's encrypted, it's there. So I think to answer your question, yes, retention is yet another set of policies that you have to apply everywhere. that I think we have tools and we have thinking on our roadmap of how to build all of those. And I think it's important. We've the first set of tools we enabled right now is the visibility, because we believe you first need to see things before you feel like you need to address them. So we're exposing a lot of risk metrics that will help you think about retention and where to apply retention. And then
It's also the horse before the cart. It has to come first, otherwise you can't do any of the others.
that's right. And with this, as we see adoption of that idea of understanding the risk in the data, then we will release the set of tools to also manage retention.
Well, I have so many great takeaways as always from this webcast. I always have I learned something and take away something from every guest that we have, and this is no exception. So thank you for that, Yakov. I love that we're on the same page when it comes to incentives and carrots and asking for those, not just the 4% fines, although those are great too, but some companies can write that off as a cost of doing business. So incentives are really great, and we know that they work for certain types of companies and personas. I also love the discussion about the permission layer, and then lastly the conversation about leveraging partnerships, because privacy is so cross-functional that if the IT or the CIO or the CISO is working on digital transformation or going to the cloud, it's an opportunity that privacy professionals can take advantage of. And so I'm curious, what are some of the things that you really want to highlight from this conversation? And in addition to that, if you have any calls to action that you would want to share with our audience, I'd love for you to be able to share that today.
Yeah, so maybe can I might start with a call to action, if that's okay, and then I'll go along on that. And I think you can follow Catch on LinkedIn to stay in the loop on our tech and upcoming events. If you have any interest in trying Catch, we have a special free trial offer for TROPT members. We can post that. I think Colleen might put through the sessions, right? So we're a startup. We love to talk to everybody. We learn from everybody we talk to. All of our prospects and our customers have made us better and smarter. So please reach out. In terms of taking away, I felt like the conversation have focused actually on the real key issues. I think it's important to understand that privacy, and governance has this aspect of legacy that it needs to address, and not just the current. I think the importance of, not just the being compliant, but the cost that involved in that, in terms of going from programs to programmatic, is really, really pivotal. And the more future-leaning ideas around how do we take the permission layers and move it to the next level of, controlling for retention and other aspects of the data, but first enabling visibility. I think these are all upcoming and important points. So I really appreciate you inviting me, and it's been a pleasure to be here.
It's been my pleasure as well. Thank you, Yakov. Well, this isn't the end, because Catch will be at our next our very first unconference, our next conference, and we're going to be talking about ethical, responsible, and privacy tech. So to broaden it up, we're going to look at the suite of tools and the intersection of ethical, responsible, and privacy tech. And so if any one of you would like to join us, it's an unconference. That means you get to bring your own topics as well and start conversations with attendees. Yakov will be there also as a speaker. And so this isn't the end. We'll continue the conversation in a month on September 28th. Catch has kindly sponsored a few limited tickets, so we'll send a link to registration in the chat, and we look forward to seeing you again on September 28th. Thank you again, Yakov, and I look forward to chatting with you at the unconference.
Thank you, Lourdes. Thank you to the listeners as well.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.